Why your faithfulness feels like a failure. Ruth spent months working in a field she didn't own, never knowing she was building the lineage of Christ. Every morning, she bent her back gathering what the harvesters dropped. The townspeople saw a widow scavenging. God saw a woman whose obedience would become a thread in the Messiah's family tree. Ruth thought she was surviving, but she was actually shaping history. And your faithfulness might be building something you cannot yet see. The book of Ruth opens with a family running out of food. A man named Elimelech leaves Bethlehem, which literally means house of bread, because the town has none. He takes his wife Naomi and their 2 sons across the border into Moab, a land Israel has fought for generations. Elimelech moves his family into enemy territory because staying in Bethlehem would mean starvation. But Moab gives them no safety, and Elimelech dies. His sons marry local women, Ruth and Orpah, and then the sons die too. Within a few short years, Naomi goes from being a wife and mother to a childless widow in enemy territory. She's left with nothing but 2 daughters-in-law who are foreigners themselves and have no obligation to stay. Somehow, Naomi learns the Lord is aiding his people in Judah. She decides to go home, but she isn't the same woman who left. She tells Ruth and Orpah to return to their own mothers and find new husbands. Orpah kisses her and leaves, but Ruth refuses. Look at what Ruth actually says. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. These aren't the words of a woman who has a backup plan. They come from someone who has looked at total loss and still chosen loyalty over comfort. Naomi doesn't celebrate Ruth's loyalty. She calls herself Mara, which means bitter, and she tells the women of Bethlehem, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Ruth stands beside her, invisible, hungry, and unsure about what comes next. Ruth wakes up the next morning in a town where nobody knows her name. She's a foreigner, a widow, and a dependent with no land, no income, and no social standing. She does the only thing a woman in her position can do, which is to go to the fields and glean. Gleaning isn't dignified work. It means walking behind the harvesters, bending to pick up the grain they have dropped, and gathering enough to make a single meal. It's backbreaking, humiliating, and completely invisible. Ruth is simply one more body in the dust, doing what poor women have always done to stay alive. The text says she happened to come to the field belonging to Boaz. Providence looks like a coincidence when you're living inside it, and it feels like just another Tuesday. Ruth doesn't know that the field she has chosen belongs to a man related to her dead husband. She simply gets up, walks out, and starts working. This is where Ruth's story starts to feel uncomfortably familiar. Most of us live in our own gleaning season right now. Perhaps you're caring for an aging parent who no longer remembers your name. You've given up weekends and sleep to manage medications and appointments, and the slow grief of watching someone you love disappear. It looks like nothing, like a routine that nobody will ever remember. But it is Ruth in the field, gathering what others drop, because love doesn't walk away when the harvest stops. Perhaps you're stuck in a career that hasn't moved in years. You show up on time and do the work nobody else wants, yet younger people still pass you by. But you keep going, because you have people who depend on you, and God hasn't told you to leave yet. Or perhaps you're living with a longing that never gets answered. Month after month, you carry a desire for a child, or a partner, or a dream that seems further away every morning. You've prayed until the words feel empty. And you keep showing up anyway because giving up feels worse than hoping. Ruth works without pause from dawn until evening, and goes home with barely enough to feed 2 women. She receives no applause and no promotion. The next morning still comes, and the field is still waiting, and the sun is still beating down on her back. The God who sees in secret. Then Boaz arrives, a wealthy landowner and a man of standing in Bethlehem, who's from the same clan as Naomi's late husband. He notices Ruth immediately, but not because she's doing anything spectacular. He notices because she stands out as different. While the other gleaners work mechanically, Ruth works with a loyalty that shows on her face. She asks permission to glean, takes almost no breaks, and doesn't flirt with the young men. Boaz asks his workers about her. They tell him the whole story. She's the Moabite woman who returned with Naomi, and she's worked steadily from daybreak until now without resting. Boaz doesn't treat her like a beggar. He tells her she can glean in his field whenever she wants, and she can drink from the water his servants have drawn. He tells his men to leave extra grain for her on purpose. Then Boaz speaks a blessing that most people read too quickly, without noticing that it carries the full weight of God's notice upon a woman the world has completely ignored. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Matthew chapter 6 stops being theory right here and becomes Ruth's actual experience. Because Jesus says your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Ruth thinks she's surviving, but God thinks she's building a testimony. The people around you are seeing something very different from what God sees. They see the routine, the exhaustion, and the same face doing the same task with no visible result. God sees the 3 a.m. prayer you whisper when nobody else is awake. He sees the meal you prepare for a parent who can't say thank you anymore. He sees the refusal to walk away from a marriage, a family, or a calling when every rational voice says you should quit. He sees it all, and his record keeping is the only one that will last. Being seen is comforting. But comfort doesn't redeem a widow's future. Ruth still has no husband, no child, and no security. Naomi knows that if something doesn't change, they will both starve before the next harvest. So Naomi devises a plan. Naomi tells Ruth to wash, put on her best clothes, and go to the threshing floor where Boaz will be working late. Ruth must wait until he has finished eating, and then approach him quietly. She must uncover his feet and lie down, which is a cultural signal that she's requesting he act as her kinsman redeemer. The goal is legally obligated to preserve the family line and the family land. This isn't a romantic subplot. It's a legal and spiritual obligation, and Ruth is risking everything. She's a foreign widow with no rights, approaching a wealthy man in the dark, asking him to cover the debts of a dead man and marry her. If Boaz refuses, Ruth's reputation is destroyed, and Naomi's family name dies with her. But Ruth does exactly what Naomi says. She goes there and waits, approaching Boaz with humility and courage. When Boaz wakes, he doesn't reject her. He calls her a woman of noble character, and he promises to resolve the matter in the morning. But there's one obstacle. A nearer relative has the first legal right to redeem Naomi's land and marry Ruth. Boaz can't promise a resolution yet. Ruth goes home before sunrise, not knowing whether her risk will pay off. Faithfulness doesn't eliminate risk. Sometimes the next faithful step is the scariest one you have taken. Ruth has no guarantee that Boaz will respond with kindness. She only has a promise she has made to Naomi and a God she's still learning to trust. The next morning, Boaz goes to the town gate, which is the public and legal heart of the community. He finds the nearest relative and sits down with the elders as witnesses. Boaz offers the land that belonged to Naomi's husband, and the relative is interested at first. But then Boaz adds the condition. Whoever buys the land must also marry Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Naomi's husband, in order to maintain the dead man's name with his property. The relative backs out immediately. He's willing to buy the land, but he's not willing to marry Ruth, a foreigner, and raise children who will carry another man's name. He tells Boaz, "You buy it." And Boaz declares in front of the entire town, "I will redeem it." The elders bless the union with language that sounds almost prophetic. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. They're praying that Ruth, a foreigner who arrived empty and invisible, will become one of the founding mothers of the nation. Then the reversal happens, and Ruth and Boaz marry, and Ruth conceives and gives birth to a son named Obed. The women of Bethlehem gather around Naomi and declare, "Naomi has a son." It's a strange thing to say because the child is Ruth's. Ruth carries him and labors for him, and her faithfulness produces him. But the community recognizes that Ruth's loyalty has reversed Naomi's emptiness. The woman who came back bitter and barren is now holding the fruit of her daughter-in-law's invisible obedience. The story could end here, with a happy family and a restored widow. But the Bible never lets Ruth's story stay small. Obed grows up and fathers Jesse, and Jesse fathers David, the greatest king Israel ever knew. Ruth, the Moabite foreigner who spent months bending among the rows, is named explicitly in Matthew chapter 1 as a direct ancestor of Jesus Christ. Ruth never saw a single day of David's reign, and she never heard the name Jesus. She simply got up every morning, worked hard, stayed loyal, and trusted a God she had only recently met. Her invisible obedience became a permanent thread in the lineage of the Messiah. Paul writes in Galatians, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." He tells the Corinthians, "Your labor in the Lord is not in vain." And James says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because, having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." These verses are talking about Ruth, even though they were written centuries later. Ruth didn't know about the proper time, and she had no idea her labor wasn't in vain. She didn't know she was passing a test that would produce a crown. She only knew that the next morning had come, and the barley still stood, and the heat still pressed down. You already know God sees you. The real question is whether you will keep going until the proper time arrives. Your empty season isn't evidence of God's absence. It's the setup for a providence you cannot yet read. Ruth's faithfulness felt like failure because she couldn't see how her own story ended. And we can't see the end of ours either, but God can. Share this with someone whose faithfulness feels invisible today. Your labor isn't in vain, and the proper time is coming, so don't stop because God will meet you there.